Chapter 1. The Son of Odin. Before there was thunder, there was silence, the deep golden silence of a kingdom that believed itself eternal. In that silence rose Asgard, a city that floated beyond the stars, its towers forged from light and gold, its foundations rooted in the ancient power of gods. From that throne, Odin Allfather ruled the nine realms, his wisdom tempered by war, his peace bought in blood, and beside him, growing like twin storms on the same horizon, were his sons, Thor, born of pride and power, and Loki, born of secrets. Thor Odinson, heir to the throne, walked the golden halls of Asgard as if they were his birthright, fearless, confident, and adored. Every step he took carried the weight of prophecy. Every cheer that followed him echoed with the expectation of destiny. He was the god of thunder, the warrior who would one day wear the crown, and in his youth he mistook strength for wisdom and victory for justice. His hammer Mjolnir spun in his hand like an extension of his will. The realm sang his name in celebration, and yet in the shadow behind him his brother watched, quiet, clever, unseen. Loki was different. Where Thor was the storm, Loki was the whisper. His power was not in his arm but in his mind. Illusions, lies, the art of persuasion. He loved his brother in the way the moon loves the sun, from a distance, forever, half in shadow. To Asgard, Thor was everything a son of Odin should be. Loki, though cherished, was something else, mysterious, strange, not quite belonging, and though he did not yet know it, that difference was written into his very blood. In those early years, peace reigned across the realms. Asgard stood watchful over the Nine, its warriors guarding the fragile balance Odin had forged through centuries of conquest. The frost giants of Jotunheim were banished, the Bifrost Bridge shimmered like a promise, and the people believed the age of war was over. But peace has always been the slowest kind of war, the kind that breeds arrogance, the kind that makes gods forget that they too can fall. The coronation of Thor was to mark the dawn of a new era, the great hall of Asgard filled with warriors and nobles, with songs and gold and the echo of triumph. Odin stood at the dais, his one eye burning with pride, his voice heavy with history. You are unworthy of the mantle of peace if you cannot wield the weight of war, he told his son. And Thor, grinning, believed he already knew the lesson, but destiny is never kind to the proud. Even as Thor's crown awaited him, shadows moved in the vault beneath the palace. Frost giants, enemies thought vanquished, slipped through Asgard's defenses, drawn by a relic of their past, the casket of ancient winters, a weapon of immeasurable cold. They were discovered, slain by Odin's guards, their bodies left as warning. But to Thor, their intrusion was not a crime. It was an insult, and an insult to a god of thunder demanded vengeance. He confronted Odin, his voice shaking the golden hall. They dare to enter our realm, to steal from us. We should teach them fear again. Odin's reply was calm, almost weary. A wise king never seeks war, but must be ready for it. Yet Thor was not yet wise, and his pride demanded satisfaction. That night, against his father's command, he gathered his friends, Sif, the warriors three, and his ever loyal, ever jealous brother. Together they crossed the Bifrost, a bridge of rainbows that sliced through the cosmos, landing in the icy wasteland of Jotunheim. The world of the frost giants was a place of death, frozen spires and endless darkness, a world that remembered the wars Odin had promised would never return. Thor walked among them as if he owned the realm, lightning sparking from his fingertips, his hammer humming with hunger. When King Laufey confronted him, the words between them were short and sharp, pride meeting pride, storm meeting frost. You are nothing but a boy, Laufey said, and you are an old fool, Thor replied, smiling. The first strike came not from Laufey, but from Thor. Lightning split the sky, ice shattered beneath it, and the war that Odin had forbidden began anew. Thor fought like the god he believed himself to be, fierce, unstoppable, radiant. His hammer shattered giants like glass, his laughter echoing through the storm, and Loki watched, silent, calculating, knowing even as the battle raged that their father's wrath would be far worse than any enemy's. When the Allfather came, he did not roar. The Bifrost flared behind him, and his voice cut through the noise like the edge of a blade. Enough! With a single command, the storm died. Thor turned to him, chest heaving, eyes blazing. They insulted us, he protested. They broke the peace. Odin's gaze was colder than any Jotun's. And you broke the law. The words that followed were older than either sun, carved into the heart of the cosmos itself. You are unworthy. The whole of Asgard fell silent that night as Odin stripped his son of his power, of his armor, of his hammer, everything that made him the god he believed himself to be. You have forgotten humility, Odin said. You have forgotten compassion. Until you learn their meaning, you are nothing. With a surge of power, Odin cast him from the shining realm to the small blue world below. Thor fell from the stars like a meteor, trailing light and pride, and when he struck the earth, the sky swallowed its thunder. In that single moment, the god of thunder became a man, flesh and bone, fragile and finite. Far above, Odin held Mjolnir in his hand, his voice, heavy with sorrow, carried across the stars. Whosoever holds this hammer, if he be worthy, shall possess the power of Thor. He cast it after his son, and it fell like a promise, or a challenge. And on earth, the desert wind blew softly over the crater where the god had fallen. The stars watched, silent. The thunder slept, but storms never stay silent for long. Sita Chapter 2. The Banishment. The stars went silent when he fell. The golden light that once marked his passage through the skies burned out into a cold streak across the void, and the god who had never known weakness crashed through the clouds and struck the earth like a broken star. There was no thunder, no lightning, no divine roar, only a hollow echo in the dust that followed. For the first time since the dawn of his existence, Thor Odinson lay still, not as a god, but as a man. The desert of New Mexico was endless and empty. The wind moved over it like breath across ancient bones. In that silence, headlights cut through the dark, and a small van came skidding to a stop. Inside were three scientists chasing anomalies in the night sky. Jane Foster, a woman who studied the patterns of the universe with the wonder of a child. Eric Selvig, a man who saw reason in what he could not explain. And Darcy Lewis, who treated every miracle like an inconvenience. They had come searching for a cosmic event, something extraordinary. What they found was a man lying in the dirt, his face lit by the soft glow of starlight and confusion. Jane was the first to reach him. He just fell out of the sky, she whispered. Eric knelt beside her, examining Thor's pulse. He's alive, barely. Thor opened his eyes, his breath ragged, and looked at them as though they were ghosts. Where am I? He asked, voice still carrying the weight of Asgard. Jane hesitated. Earth, she said softly. You're in New Mexico. He tried to rise, but his body betrayed him. The strength that once leveled armies had left him. He was mortal. They brought him to town, more out of curiosity than kindness. He spoke like no one they had ever met, demanding his hammer, his armor, his father's name. To them he was delirious, a handsome madman talking about realms and gods. But Jane saw something else in his eyes, something ancient and lost. She wanted to understand him, not as a subject, but as a mystery. Meanwhile, somewhere miles away, another impact had torn the earth apart. In the middle of the desert, a crater smoked under the dawn light. At its center lay Mjolnir, Odin's hammer, gleaming and silent, half buried in stone. Men from SOHI Yield arrived within hours. They erected fences, floodlights, and secrecy. To them, it was a weapon, a phenomenon. To Thor, it was everything. He tried to find it. He broke free from Jane's care, stole a shirt that wasn't his, and stumbled into the desert night. Every step was agony. His body ached, his lungs burned, and yet he walked as if something was pulling him, something that belonged to him. He found the crater ringed with guards and lights, the hammer waiting for him like a promise carved into fate. He smiled for the first time since he had fallen. My hammer, he whispered. He fought his way through the compound, no magic, no lightning, no divine strength. Just a man with stubbornness and fury. Every punch hurt, every breath came harder, but he pressed forward until the hammer was in sight. Rain began to fall, soft and rare over the desert. He reached out his hand, trembling, waiting for the familiar surge of power, the warmth of lightning through his veins. His fingers brushed the metal. Nothing. The world went still. He pulled harder, both hands now, muscles straining, tears burning in his eyes. The hammer did not move. It lay still, silent, indifferent. It was no longer his. For the first time, Thor Odinson felt the weight of unworthiness. The guards dragged him away, but he didn't resist. He had no strength left to fight, not against them, not against the truth. In the days that followed, Thor stayed with Jane and her friends, broken but alive. He learned small things, how coffee was too bitter, how cars moved faster than horses, how people laughed even when their hearts were heavy. He helped Jane rebuild her equipment after SHIELD confiscated her research. He apologized when his temper flared, and slowly the storm inside him began to quiet. One evening, as the sun sank into the horizon, Jane asked him about Asgard. He spoke softly, not like a warrior, but like a son remembering home. It is beautiful, he said, golden towers that catch the light of 1,000 stars, a place where even the wind sings. My father rules with wisdom, and my brother. He stopped, his voice catching. My brother was clever, too clever perhaps. Jane smiled. Sounds like you miss it. He nodded. I miss who I was when I belonged there. That night he looked at the sky and saw nothing. The stars felt distant now, unreachable. Somewhere above, Odin watched silently from his throne, his heart heavy. His son had begun to learn humility, not from punishment, but from pain. But even in exile, Thor's story was not his alone. Back in Asgard, Loki walked through the shadows of the throne room, his mind turning like a storm. He had discovered what Odin never meant for him to know, that he was not truly Asgardian, but Jotun, the son of Laufey, the very enemy Thor had fought. Rage, confusion, betrayal. He felt them all like knives. While Thor struggled to become human, Loki struggled to understand what he was. And in that struggle, he began to shape his own destiny. On Earth, Thor and Jane grew closer. She saw in him not a god, but a man who wanted to understand. They drove through the desert together, tracing celestial maps and chasing impossible storms. He watched her laugh, eyes bright with wonder, and for the first time he envied mortals, their short lives, their endless capacity for hope. He began to see beauty in their fragility. And then the storm came, the destroyer descended, an Asgardian weapon sent to erase what Odin had cast out. Its steps shattered the earth, its armor glowing with the fire of the realm eternal. The humans ran. Thor did not. He stood before it, unarmed, mortal, facing the end with quiet certainty. I, no, I have no right to ask, he whispered to the sky, but if I can protect them, let me. The destroyer struck him down. His body fell to the dirt, lifeless. The wind grew still. But in Asgard, Odin stirred from his rest. The lesson was complete. Mjolnir trembled where it lay, the enchantment awakening. The hammer rose into the air, wrapped in lightning, and flew across the sky. In the desert, thunder cracked like the voice of a god. The hammer found his hand, and the man who had fallen from the stars rose again, not as the arrogant prince who had defied his father, but as Thor, the god of thunder reborn. Lightning split the sky, the destroyer fell, and as Jane looked at him, breathless and awestruck, she didn't see a god. She saw a man who had learned what it meant to be worthy. Chapter 3. The Hammer in the Desert. The rain still fell when he stood again. The desert that had once seemed lifeless now glowed with the pulse of lightning, and the man who had crawled through the dust rose to meet the storm that had always been waiting for him. Around him the world shuddered with energy, the kind that carries both destruction and rebirth. Jane watched as the hammer returned to its master's hand, drawn by something older than gravity, older even than the gods. Worthiness. For the first time since he had fallen from the stars, Thor Odinson felt whole. The moment Mjolnir touched his palm, the storm came alive. Lightning ran across his body like a crown returning to its king. The armor reformed, gold and silver over his shoulders, the red cape unfurling behind him like the banner of a forgotten world. The mortals gasped, eyes wide, but to Thor, it wasn't power that returned, it was purpose. He wasn't the god who demanded worship anymore. He was the guardian who had finally learned to kneel before the fragile. The destroyer turned toward him, its metal plates glowing from within, a living furnace of divine wrath. Each step it took melted the ground beneath it, and its face, that hollow, featureless mask, reflected Thor's own past arrogance. The soldiers had fled, the town lay in ruins, and Jane stood frozen, unable to look away. Thor raised his hammer, not as a weapon of vengeance, but as an extension of his will to protect. Brother, he called out to the sky, his voice calm despite the storm. Whatever you've done, I will end it. The first strike came like thunder itself. The destroyer's beam of fire carved through the streets, but Thor moved faster, his hammer catching the blast mid-air, redirecting it into the heavens. The explosion painted the clouds in light. He advanced, every swing measured, deliberate, controlled. Each strike echoed through the desert, the sound of metal and godhood colliding. When the final blow landed, the destroyer shattered into molten shards, collapsing under its own fury. The storm began to fade, the air heavy with rain and silence. Jane approached him, her face streaked with tears and ash. You said you couldn't stop it, she whispered. Thor turned to her, his expression soft. I was wrong, he said. A wise king never seeks war, but he must be ready for it. It was a phrase he had once mocked, now spoken with the weight of a man who understood. That night, the desert was quiet again. The air smelled of dust and rain. Jane and Thor stood by the crater where the hammer had first fallen, the sky wide and full of stars. Will you go back? She asked. He looked upward, toward the sky that held both his home and his guilt. If my father wills it, he said, but I would stay if I could. Jane smiled faintly. You don't belong here. He looked at her then, his gaze gentle. Neither do I belong there, not yet. Above them, in Asgard, Loki stood alone on the throne. His father's silence had become his opportunity, his brother's absence his excuse. He ruled in shadows, draped in illusion, whispering lies to courtiers and guards. To them, Odin still sat upon the throne, but it was Loki who now shaped the fate of the realm, and from that seat he watched his brothers rise with envy. When he had sent the destroyer, it was not to protect Asgard, but to erase the one person who still believed in him. Loki's heart twisted with contradiction. He hated Thor, but he also longed for him to return, to see him, to understand. When news reached Asgard of the destroyer's fall, Loki's mask of control cracked. He has regained his power, Heimdall said quietly. Loki's expression darkened. Then the storm returns to us all. Back on Earth, Shield had begun to retreat. They could not explain what had happened, nor could they contain it. Agent Coulson approached Thor with a look that mixed suspicion and reluctant respect. Whatever you are, he said, you're one of the good ones. Thor nodded, a quiet smile touching his lips. Keep the hammer safe, he said. It has a habit of returning to me. The next day, the Bifrost opened across the sky, a river of light, cutting through the clouds, humming with the energy of the cosmos. The mortals looked up in awe as Thor turned to Jane. This is goodbye, he said. For now. She stepped closer, her eyes wet. Will I see you again? He smiled, small and uncertain. You will see me in every storm. Then the light took him, wrapping around him like a promise, pulling him home. Asgard greeted him with silence. The great halls were cold, the air thick with unease. Heimdall bowed low, relief flickering across his golden eyes. You have returned, he said. Thor looked past him toward the throne. Where is my father? Heimdall's gaze shifted. He sleeps, by whose will I do not know. Loki was waiting. He sat upon the throne, clad in green and gold, his smile sharp as a blade. Brother, he said, his voice smooth, you've come home. Thor approached, eyes narrowing. What trick is this? Loki's tone turned soft, almost mournful. No trick. Father is gone. The throne falls to me. In that moment, Thor saw the truth, not in Loki's words, but in his eyes. The jealousy, the pain, the hunger to be seen. He felt pity, not anger. Loki, he said, this is madness. Loki's expression flickered between rage and grief. Madness? He spat. Is it madness to want what was denied me? To be a son instead of a secret? The brothers clashed, thunder against illusion, love against resentment. Their battle tore through the palace, their words sharper than their weapons. You can't kill me, Thor said, his hammer raised. Loki smiled sadly. No, but I can make you wish I had. And with a flick of his hand, the Bifrost roared to life. The rainbow bridge burned with light as Loki opened it fully, aiming its power at Jotunheim, the realm that had birthed him, the people he now sought to annihilate. You can't! Thor shouted. Loki's voice trembled with fury. I can end them. I can prove myself worthy of Father's love. The bridge shook under the strain. Thor realized what he had to do. He looked at Loki, his brother, his enemy, his reflection. Forgive me, he whispered. Then he brought Mjolnir down with all his strength, shattering the bridge and sending them both tumbling into the void. Odin caught them at the edge of the abyss, his grip firm but trembling. Loki's eyes filled with tears. I could have done it, father. I could have made you proud. Odin's voice broke. No, my son. The words were soft, final. No. Loki's expression faltered, and then he let go. Thor screamed his brother's name as he fell into the dark. The rainbow light died. Asgard trembled. In the silence that followed, Odin placed his hand on Thor's shoulder. You have done what I could not, he said. You have learned what it means to rule. Thor bowed his head. No, father, he said quietly. I have learned what it means to serve. And, somewhere far below the stars, in the shadowed reaches of space, Loki opened his eyes again, his fall not an ending but the beginning of something darker. Chapter 4. The Worthy Son. Asgard had never felt so quiet. The Golden City, once filled with laughter and the music of celebration, now stood still beneath its endless sky. The rainbow bridge was gone, shattered into memory, fragments of light scattered through the void. Where once there had been the hum of energy connecting realms, there was now only silence. And within that silence, Thor Odinson walked alone. He had returned from the edge of eternity, from battle and loss, from the fall of his brother. His armor was scuffed, his eyes older. Every step through the palace echoed differently now, slower, heavier. The cheers that once greeted him had turned to whispers. To the people of Asgard, he was still their hero. To Thor himself, he was something less certain. He stood before the throne, the golden seat of the All-Father, and saw it not as a prize, but as a burden. Odin watched from his high place, his face carved in the calm of kings who have seen too much. You did what had to be done, he said softly. You stopped the bridge. You saved them all. Thor lowered his gaze. At the cost of my brother. Odin's single eye flickered with pain. He made his choice. Thor shook his head. And I made mine. But I would undo both if I could. Odin rose slowly, his steps echoing like thunder in a tomb. That is why you are worthy, my son. Not because you are strong, because you grieve. He placed a hand on Thor's shoulder. A wise king never rejoices in the death of his enemies. Thor met his father's gaze. Then perhaps I am not ready to be a king. Odin nodded. Then you are closer than you think. The days that followed were strange. The people celebrated victory, but Thor found no joy in it. He watched the sun rise from the palace balcony, the light reflecting off towers that felt colder than before. He missed the sound of Loki's voice. Sharp, clever, irritating, alive. The throne room felt wrong without him. His friends, the warriors Three and Lady Sif, tried to lift his spirit. They spoke of adventures yet to come, of battles that would sing their names into eternity. Thor smiled for them, but his heart was elsewhere, with a mortal woman beneath another sky. Jane Foster. Her name was a quiet thought that came to him like breath, unbidden and persistent. He imagined her looking up at the stars, searching for the bridge that would never open again. He had promised her he'd return, and now he could not. The distance between them was greater than any storm he could cross, yet he could not let her go entirely. Each night he stood beside Heimdall's observatory, looking into the cosmos. Can you see her? He asked. Heimdall's golden eyes shimmered with light. Always, he replied. She searches for you still. Thor smiled faintly. She is relentless. Heimdall nodded. Then she is like you. Asgard was safe, but the other realms were not. Without the Bifrost, the balance Odin had maintained began to falter. Bandits rose, realms fell into chaos, and whispers of rebellion echoed across the Nine. Odin sent word through ancient paths, summoning his armies. Thor led them, not with arrogance this time, but with restraint. He fought not to conquer, but to protect. Each battle taught him something new, that power alone does not bring peace, and that the strongest weapon a leader can wield is mercy. He carried Mjolnir with reverence now, not as a trophy, but as a promise. Every time he raised it, he remembered the desert, the dirt beneath his hands, the humility that had made him worthy. The hammer no longer felt like a gift, it felt like a responsibility. But peace could not last. In the depths of the cosmos, a shadow stirred, something ancient and dark that predated even Odin's rule. The Nine realms were aligning, their boundaries thinning, and from those cracks something would soon emerge. Back in Asgard, Frigga, ever the silent wisdom beside Odin's fury, saw the wear in her son's eyes. One evening she found him in the great hall, his hammer resting beside him, his thoughts far away. You cannot save everyone, she said gently. Thor looked at her, his voice soft. I would if I could. She smiled, touching his cheek. Then you will try, and that is enough. Your heart is your father's, but your compassion, that is mine. He smiled faintly. You and father rule in balance. Her gaze deepened. Then perhaps one day you will learn that a king must balance himself. That night, Thor walked the empty halls of Asgard, his footsteps echoing through stone and silence. The torches flickered as he passed. He paused at the spot where Loki had stood the day of the coronation that never came. His fingers brushed the cold floor. I would have shared it with you, he whispered. The throne, the realm, the burden, you never believed me. His voice caught in his throat. But I did. In another part of the cosmos, Loki opened his eyes. He was alive, drifting through the void, pulled by a current of strange energy. Before him floated a figure, cloaked in shadow, a being ancient and whispering, one who promised power and revenge. The god of mischief smiled through blood and starlight. Tell me, he said, how do we begin? On Asgard, Thor felt the wind shift, a tremor that only gods could sense, the quiet before a new storm. He looked out over his realm, the city gleaming beneath him, the stars flickering like warnings. Something stirs, he murmured. Heimdall's voice came faint through the distance. The realms move again. The peace you bought is not built to last. Thor gripped Mjolnir tightly. Then let them come. But even as he spoke the words, a small, unspoken truth lingered in his heart. He no longer fought for glory. He fought because he must, because protecting others was the only way he knew to atone for what he had lost. The thunder rolled softly over Asgard that night, no longer a roar of arrogance, but a steady heartbeat, the sound of a god learning how to be worthy not once, but always. Chapter 5: Brothers and Betrayal. In the emptiness between stars, Loki fell through the dark. The void had no sound, no light, no warmth, only memory. The last image that burned behind his eyes was his father's face, not cold, but full of sorrow. No, my son. Those words repeated endlessly as the void swallowed him whole. For a time, he drifted as thought without shape, consciousness without body, until a flicker of green light appeared before him. It was faint at first, like a whisper in the dark, then brighter, alive, beckoning. From that light, a voice spoke. You seek purpose. Loki turned toward it, the corners of his mind reforming, his anger coalescing into form. And you offer it? He asked. The voice smiled without sound. I offer what you've always desired: power, recognition, a place above the gods who cast you out. When Loki's eyes opened again, the void was gone. In its place stood a world that wasn't a world at all. Black skies, burning stars, and a throne that floated on nothing. Before it stood a figure cloaked in shadow, his face hidden, his presence immense. You have fallen far, son of Odin, the figure said. Loki smirked. Son of no one, it seems. The figure tilted its head. Then perhaps it is time you took a new name. And from that meeting an alliance was born, a quiet pact between the god of mischief and the servant of something far older and hungrier than any god. The figure handed him a staff, its tip glowing with blue fire, alive with the pulse of a different kind of power. A gift, the voice said, for the chaos to come. Loki held it, felt its weight, and smiled. Now we begin. Far from that shadowed place, in the golden realm above the stars, peace was growing brittle. Without the Bifrost, Asgard had lost its hold on the realms. Marauders raided the outer worlds, dark elves whispered in the cracks of reality, and even the mighty began to feel fear again. Thor led his warriors through battle after battle, quelling uprisings and sealing breaches. Every victory was hollow, every triumph left him more tired than before. He fought not for conquest but for maintenance, for the fragile order his father's age had left behind. And yet, even in his duty, Thor could not stop looking upward. Each night he stood beside Heimdall, the stars reflecting in his eyes. Has there been any sign of my brother? He would ask, and each night Heimdall would pause before answering. There are places even I cannot see. Thor nodded, though the silence between them always carried the same unspoken truth. Loki was gone, but not lost. In Asgard, Odin felt the weight of years pressing against him. He had fought for ages to hold the realms in balance, and he knew what Thor did not, that the balance was breaking. Frigga saw it too, the quiet dread in her husband's eyes, the exhaustion that came not from battle, but from time itself. She often found Thor alone, his hammer resting at his sighed, staring at the horizon. You long for Earth, she said gently. Thor smiled, weary but kind. It is a world that reminds me of what matters, of humility, of love. Frigga's eyes softened. Then perhaps you should hold on to that. Even gods need something mortal to believe in. But across the universe, the storm was gathering. Loki had not been idle. Guided by the whisper in the dark, by the will of Thanos, he began to study the paths between worlds, learning how to move unseen, how to pierce the boundaries of reality that even Asgard could not cross. Through the scepter he had been given, he glimpsed the blue light within, the Mind Stone, though he did not yet understand its true nature. To him it was a key, and every key must unlock something. When he returned to the known realms, it was not as the Loki who had fallen, but as something changed, darker, sharper, less a man than an idea. He appeared first in shadows, whispering through the minds of those already corrupted. He spoke to the forgotten, the angry, the ambitious. He offered them freedom, glory, revenge. He learned that mortals were easy to bend, not because they were weak, but because they hoped, and nothing is easier to twist than hope. In Asgard, Thor began to feel his brother's presence again, not through sight or sound, but through unease. It came like a pressure in the air, a ripple across the stars. Heimdall sensed it too. Something moves, he warned. Something unnatural. Thor nodded. A storm without thunder. Then came the vision. In his sleep, Thor saw fire spreading through the realms, a shadow swallowing the stars, and his brother standing at the heart of it, eyes glowing blue. When he woke, Mjolnir hummed softly beside him, as if warning him that the storm had already begun. The next day, he stood before Odin's throne. Father, there's something coming. I feel it. Odin's gaze was heavy. There is always something coming, my son. The duty of a king is to meet it before it arrives. Thor stepped closer. If Loki lives, Odin interrupted sharply. Then he has chosen his path. Thor's voice hardened. And I will choose mine. But before Odin could answer, the sky outside Asgard shimmered like ripples over water, and Heimdall's horn sounded across the realm. Thor turned toward the light that spread across the stars. It was not the Bifrost, it was something else, a portal, unstable and unnatural. From its heart, a streak of energy shot across the heavens, vanishing into the dark beyond. Loki had made his move. Down on Earth, in a quiet observatory, Jane Foster's instruments began to tremble. Readings spiked off the charts, magnetic fields twisting into patterns no one could explain. Darcy looked at the monitors, eyes wide. Uh, Jane? You might want to see this. Jane leaned in, her breath catching. That's that's not a storm. In Asgard, Thor gripped his hammer, the sky alive with light. He's found a way back, he murmured. Odin's voice came from behind him, grim and final. Then the nine realms will feel his return. Thor looked to the stars. Somewhere, far beyond what even Heimdall could see, his brother was already stepping through a doorway into another world, Earth. The god of thunder and the god of mischief were on the same path once more, their fates bound tighter than either could escape. One sought redemption through humility, the other vengeance through chaos. And somewhere between them, the universe itself began to tremble. For the first time since his fall, Thor felt the thunder within him stir, not as arrogance, but as warning. The age of peace was ending, the age of men was beginning, and with it would come the war that would test what worthy truly meant. The storm had returned, but this time it had two faces. Chapter 6. The Dark World. There are wars that roar and wars that whisper. The next one began with silence. In the stillness between the nine realms, a shadow stirred, something ancient, something older, than even Odin's rule. The convergence was coming, the rare alignment of worlds that tore the fabric of space apart, linking realms that were never meant to touch. To mortals, it was a celestial anomaly. To the gods, it was an omen. And in that quiet turning of the cosmos, something long buried began to wake, far beneath the surface of a forgotten world, where the stars had not shone for millennia. The dark elves slept. They had been defeated before time was counted, their king Malekith banished into myth. But myths have a way of breathing again when the universe looks away. As the worlds aligned, the seal that had held their empire broke, and darkness inhaled once more. In the ruins of their ancient ship, Malekith opened his eyes. The ether lives, he whispered, and so will we. On Asgard, the golden halls no longer gleamed as brightly. The long peace Thor had fought to maintain was unraveling. He led raids across the realms to restore order, small wars, quick victories, endless repetition. He was no longer the reckless prince who sought glory in every battle. He fought with purpose now, but purpose can be a heavy chain. Your heart is elsewhere, Sif told him one evening as they stood overlooking the Bifrost, newly repaired. You fight as if you wish you were not here. Thor looked away. The earth reflected in his eyes. Perhaps I do. He had not seen Jane in 2 years. Time flowed differently between worlds, but longing ignored all laws. Each night he looked toward the stars, wondering if she still looked back, and far away she did. Jane Foster hadn't stopped searching. Her instruments had tracked anomalies for months, strange gravitational readings, invisible energy clusters. She didn't know it yet, but what she was chasing was the same thing that had awakened Malekith, the ether. In London, one of her devices began to flicker. Darcy followed her through abandoned warehouses until they found a strange rift in space itself, a tear in the air where gravity bent and objects vanished. That's not normal, Darcy muttered. Jane stepped closer. It's beautiful, she whispered, and before she could stop herself, she was pulled inside. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, light. A crimson mist swirled around her, seeping into her skin, her veins glowing red. The ether had found a host. Back in Asgard, Heimdall felt it immediately. His gaze turned distant, troubled. There is a darkness moving through the worlds, he said. I cannot see her. Thor's chest tightened. Her? Heimdall's silence was answer enough. Within hours, Thor was on Earth again. The Bifrost cracked the clouds, lightning marking his return. Jane saw him through the rain and couldn't move. 2 years of silence vanished in a heartbeat. You came back, she said, her voice breaking between disbelief and relief. Thor smiled softly. I never truly left. But joy turned to fear quickly. When he reached for her, a pulse of red energy erupted from her body, knocking him backward. The ether roared through her veins, wild and ancient. Thor looked at her in horror and awe. By the Nine, he whispered, what have you done? He took her to Asgard, hoping his people could help her. Frigga welcomed Jane with kindness, her wisdom cutting through fear. The ether is not meant for mortal flesh, she warned, but it has chosen her, for now she lives because it wills her to. Odin, on the other hand, saw only danger. It should have been left buried, he thundered. That power will consume her and us. But before they could decide what to do, the sky above Asgard darkened. The dark elves had returned. Their ships descended like shadows made solid, slipping through Asgard's defenses. The city erupted in flames. Thor led the counterattack, lightning flashing across the sky. But Malekith's army was unlike anything they had faced before. Ancient, relentless, silent. They struck with precision, cutting through the palace walls as if they were mist. In the chaos, Malekith found what he sought. He entered Asgard's heart, his form cloaked in black armor, his voice like dust. He found Frigga alone with Jane. Where is it? He demanded. Frigga stood between them, her sword drawn. You'll not find it here. Malekith smiled faintly. Then I'll take what hides it. The duel was brief, fierce, and tragic. Frigga fought with the grace of a queen and the fury of a mother. But even gods can bleed. When Thor arrived, lightning blazing, it was already too late. Frigga lay still, her light fading. The ether had vanished with Jane, hidden again by its own will. Thor knelt beside his mother, the thunder inside him silent. Mother, he whispered, voice breaking, forgive me. Asgard mourned, the torches burned low, the halls filled with song and grief. Odin's rage turned the sky red. We will destroy them, he vowed. We will burn their worlds to dust. But Thor had seen too much loss to believe in vengeance. No, father, he said, war will not bring her back. Odin turned, fury flashing in his eye. You dare defy me again? Thor met his gaze. I dare to be your son. He made his choice. If Asgard would not act with mercy, he would. With the help of Sif, the warriors three, and the unlikeliest of allies, Loki, Thor planned to take Jane and confront Malekith himself. Loki sat in his cell, a shadow of the trickster he once was, his grief buried beneath layers of mockery. You must be truly desperate, he said when Thor approached. Thor's voice was calm but strained. Mother would have wanted us to fight together. Loki's smirk faltered just for a heartbeat. Mother is dead because of me. Thor's eyes softened. Then help me honor her. And so the brothers stood side by side once more. They escaped Asgard through deception and illusion, Loki's tricks fooling even Odin's guards. Jane, weakened by the ether, followed them into the darkness of space. Thor did not trust Loki, but he needed him. And Loki, though he would never admit it, needed to be needed again. They found Malekith on the world of Svartalfheim, the dead realm. The air was thick with ash, the sky forever grey. There Loki played his final hand, or so it seemed. When Malekith tried to draw the ether from Jane, Loki turned on his brother, stabbing him, betraying him once more. Thor fell, gasping, rage consuming him. But as Malekith absorbed the ether, Loki revealed the truth. It had been a ruse. The illusion dropped. Thor hurled Mjolnir, the explosion of power scattering the elves. But the victory was not complete. Malekith escaped, and Loki, wounded for real this time, fell to his knees. I didn't do it for him, he whispered as Thor cradled him. Tell father. Thor's voice cracked. You'll tell him yourself. Loki smiled weakly. I didn't do it for him. And then he was still. Thor buried his brother in silence, believing him gone. But as he and Jane returned to Earth, the illusion remained. On Asgard's throne, a familiar figure appeared, disguised in Odin's form, cloaked in the Allfather's majesty. Loki lived, and the Golden City bowed once more to a lie. Chapter 7. The Price of Victory. There are victories that ring like thunder, and there are victories that echo like silence. Thor's triumph over the Dark Elves was of the second kind, quiet, heavy, hollow. The battle had ended, the ether was gone, and Jane was safe. But in the spaces left behind, loss lingered like fog. Frigga was gone, Loki was gone, and Asgard, though still standing, had changed forever. The funeral of the queen was carved into the heavens themselves. The sky burned with gold as her body was set upon the river, her face lit by the eternal flame. All of Asgard watched as the water carried her into the stars. Thor stood still, his expression calm but his hands trembling. When the ship reached the edge of the sky, a beam of light lifted it, and in an instant it became dust and brilliance, her spirit scattering into the night. For a brief moment every star seemed to shine a little brighter. Then the light faded. In the days that followed, Asgard returned to a fragile peace. Odin sat upon the throne, his face marked by grief. But grief in kings often hardens into judgment, and in Odin it became stone. The nine realms grow restless, he said. We must rule with strength. Thor listened but said nothing. He had seen what strength without mercy could destroy. When the council dismissed, Odin called after him. You've done well, my son. It is time you took the throne. Thor hesitated. I am not ready. You are more than ready, Odin replied. You have fought, you have sacrificed, you have learned humility. Thor looked away. A wise king never seeks out war, he said softly. And yet, father, all I've done since my return is fight. I have seen too much of death. I have seen too much of what our power costs. Odin's voice sharpened. Do you deny your destiny? Thor looked at the throne, gleaming beneath the torchlight. I deny that it must be mine. He walked away, leaving the sound of his footsteps echoing through the golden hall, the sound of a man turning from a crown he had once dreamed of wearing. In the shadows behind the throne, unseen by any but the empty air, a familiar figure watched. The illusion flickered once, then solidified. The Allfather's form melted away, and in its place stood Loki. His smile was faint, bittersweet, and heavy with secrets. He had taken the throne not through conquest, but through deceit, wearing his father's face as both disguise and armor. From the golden seat, he watched his brother walk away, the brother who still mourned him, who still believed in his redemption. You always were the better man, Loki murmured quietly. That's what makes you so easy to fool. And yet, even as he said it, there was no joy in the victory. The throne room felt cold. The weight of Asgard's crown was heavier than he had imagined. He ruled now, yes, but he ruled in silence. There were no cheers, no songs, no love. Only the endless duty that had crushed his father. Meanwhile, on Earth, Jane returned to her work. The portals that had connected the realms were closing again, leaving behind traces of energy she could only describe as cosmic ghosts. At night, she looked at the stars and wondered if Thor was looking back. He was, but duty held him in chains. The gods could move between worlds, but even gods could not escape responsibility. Asgard prospered outwardly. Trade resumed with the realms. The Bifrost carried warriors and messengers once more, and the people sang Thor's name as a savior, but he was not there to hear it. He spent his days beyond the city, walking among the common folk, helping where he could. He repaired what was broken, listened to their fears, and in their simplicity found something divine. They did not bow to him, they thanked him, and it humbled him more than any exile. One night Heimdall found him on the edge of the rainbow cliffs, watching the auroras shift above the void. You avoid the palace, Heimdall said. Thor smiled faintly. Perhaps it avoids me. Heimdall stepped beside him. Your heart is troubled. Thor nodded. I feel the storm returning, not of weather or war, something greater, as if all that we've built is built on sand. Heimdall looked to the stars. The cosmos stirs. I see things I cannot name, a shadow older than the gods, and in it I see infinity. Thor frowned. You speak in riddles, my friend. I speak in warnings, Heimdall said. There are powers beyond even the Allfather's sight, and they are watching. Far away, beyond Asgard's light, a gauntleted hand closed around the handle of a throne carved from rock and death. In the darkness, a voice like the edge of eternity murmured, Fine, I'll do it myself. The universe shifted, though no one yet knew it. Back in Asgard, Loki ruled in Odin's guise. He played the part well, issuing decrees, speaking with measured wisdom, offering compassion when needed, wrath when convenient. But at night, when the halls were empty and the mask grew heavy, he dropped the illusion and sat alone. He poured himself wine, the cup trembling in his hand. For the first time, back in Asgard, Loki ruled in Odin's guise. He played the part well, issuing decrees, speaking with measured wisdom, offering compassion when needed, wrath when convenient. But at night, when the halls were empty and the mask grew heavy, he dropped the illusion and sat alone. He poured himself wine, the cup trembling in his hand. For the first time in his life, he had everything he once thought he wanted: the throne, the power, the freedom to shape Asgard in his image. And yet, it felt like ash in his mouth. He looked at his reflection in a darkened mirror, Odin's face staring back at him. With a flick of green magic, his disguise vanished, revealing his own form underneath. Loki's shoulders sagged. Is this what victory feels like? He whispered. To the quiet hall. He waited for applause, for triumph, for purpose. None came. In the end, he had won nothing. Not the love of his father, not the acceptance of his people, not even revenge had satisfied him. His victory had come at the cost of the only person who had ever truly believed he could be more than what others saw: his mother. On Earth, Jane Foster tried to return to a normal life, but life no longer felt normal. She had seen worlds beyond her own, tasted the infinite, carried an ancient cosmic relic inside her own body, and worst of all, she had felt something that terrified her more than the unknown. She had loved a god. Nights were the hardest. She would sit alone on rooftops or by quiet lakes, searching the sky for a glimmer of the Bifrost. Sometimes she would whisper his name just to hear it. Thor. It hung unanswered in the night, but she did not give up hope, and neither did Thor. But hope is not always enough to hold back destiny. Across the cosmos, someone else had begun to move. The Titans whispered his name. The Kree feared him. The Chitauri worshipped him. Thanos, the mad Titan, the one who had guided Loki from the shadows, who had gifted him the scepter and set him on a collision course with Earth. He watched, patient and inevitable. He spoke little. He waited long, for he knew something Thor did not: that gods could fall, and that every hero had a breaking point. Back in Asgard, Thor made his decision. He returned to the throne room, where Odin awaited, though he still believed it truly was his father. The All-Father looked at him with hard eyes. Have you come to claim what is yours? Thor shook his head. No, I cannot be king. I choose to protect the realms, not rule them. Odin studied him carefully. You reject the throne, knowing it may never be offered again? I do, Thor said. A throne is not my destiny. I would rather fight for peace than sit above those who suffer. There was a long silence, then a slow nod. You are wiser than I believed, said the false Odin. Thor bowed his head. Thank you, father. He turned and walked away, unaware that behind him Loki stood in disguise, not angry, not triumphant, but silently shaken. For the first time, Loki saw his brother not as a rival, but as something far more dangerous than an enemy, a man he could never hope to be. And so, Thor left the palace, not as king, not as prince, but as something rarer, a protector with no crown. The Bifrost shone above him, and he stepped onto its bridge, ready to face whatever storm would come. But storms do not warn before they break, and in the deepest reaches of space, where gods do not tread and empires crumble into dust, a gaunt figure turned his gaze toward the nine realms and smiled. The universe was about to change forever. Chapter 8: The Fall of the All-Father. There are moments in a life, even in the life of a god, when destiny tightens around the soul like a closing fist. Thor had felt the weight of storms before, but this one was different. This was not a storm of lightning or battle, but of fate itself, pulling at him from across the cosmos. Something was wrong in Asgard. He could feel it in the way the Bifrost trembled beneath his boots, in the way Heimdall's gaze grew distant when asked about the throne, and in the way his heart tightened when he thought of his father, of the man who had shaped him, exiled him, and taught him what it meant to be worthy. Thor had returned from war, had refused the crown, and chosen instead to be protector of the realms. But even as he carried his duty with honor, a question haunted him each night as he looked toward the stars. What if home was no longer what he left behind? He returned to Asgard after quelling a rebellion on Vanaheim, Mjolnir still humming from battle. Warriors cheered his victory, but their voices felt muted to him, hollow, distant. Something in their eyes unsettled him. Not triumph, not joy, something else. Pity? Fear? The cheers did not reach the heart of the realm. They stopped at the golden gates, beyond which something darker lingered. Thor walked the ancient halls, feeling a strange presence behind the walls, woven into the air itself. The All-Father wasn't seen. Odin, who once stood before his people with thunder in his voice, had vanished from the public eye. In his place, orders came cold and sharp, lacking the wisdom Thor had always known in his father. Decisions were made without balance, punishments without mercy, decrees without counsel. Thor knew then that the whispers were true. Asgard had changed, and not for the better. He went to Heimdall, guardian of the Bifrost, the one being who could never lie. My friend, Thor said quietly, you see everything. Tell me what I already fear. Heimdall looked at him with an expression Thor had never seen before, helplessness. I no longer see the All-Father, he said. His presence has fallen from my sight. Someone has cloaked him, hidden him. Thor's fingers tightened around the handle of his hammer. Who would dare such a thing? Heimdall did not blink. The one who has always desired the throne. Thor needed no more words. Loki. He stormed into the throne room, boots echoing like thunder across the polished floor. Odin sat upon the throne, draped in royal cloth, expression calm, but Thor felt it instantly. Something wrong in the way he sat, the way he breathed, the way he looked at his son. There was no warmth, no heavy burden of age, no fire of a king, only amusement. Father, Thor said, voice controlled but sharp, we must speak plainly. There is a rot in the heart of Asgard, and I fear it is of our own making. Odin smiled slightly, too slightly. My son, always so dramatic. Thor stepped closer. Do not toy with me. Where is Heimdall? Why have you dismissed him from his post? Odin waved a hand casually. A guardian who cannot see everything is of little use to us. Thor froze. Heimdall? Useless? Odin would never speak such words. His eyes narrowed. Who are you? Odin stood slowly from the throne, his voice dropping its regal weight. Your king. Thor lifted Mjolnir, not to attack, but to threaten. I will ask once more. Where is Odin? The man before him sighed, as though annoyed, and then he smiled. Not Odin's smile, Loki's. Green light flickered, illusions peeled away, and there he was, alive, Loki, smirking upon the throne he had stolen. Surprised? He asked. Thor stared in disbelief, betrayal crackling in his chest. You live! Loki spread his arms as if welcoming applause. A bit dramatic, I admit, but death suits me. It gets me things I want. Thor's voice darkened. Where is he? Loki rolled his eyes. Fine, fine. I suppose you won't leave until you find him. Very well, I'll take you to him. And just like that, Asgard's lies fell apart. Thor dragged Loki through the palace, past the gilded halls they'd grown up in, past the banners they once saluted under side by side. Loki walked casually, as though this were all a game. You know, I really did Asgard a favor, he said. I ruled quite gently. A little theater here, a few executions there. Nothing too extreme. Thor's grip tightened. I should throw you in chains. You already did, Loki replied with a smile. You see how well that turned out. They reached the Bifrost. Where is he? Thor demanded again. Loki shrugged. Earth. Retirement, of sorts. He seemed happy enough. Thor glared. Loki shrugged again. I left him in a nice place. They traveled to Midgard. When they arrived in an open field under grey skies, Thor looked around and saw nothing but grass and wind. Loki gestured lazily. This is it. Thor raised his hammer threateningly, but before he could speak, a portal opened around Loki. A glowing ring of amber energy wrapped around his ankles and chest, pulling him violently through space. What is? Thor! Thor! Loki shouted before disappearing. Thor blinked. Loki? Behind him a voice spoke. Mr. Odinson? Thor turned to see a man in a red cape and a blue suit floating above the ground. Dr. Stephen Strange. Your brother has been causing issues, Strange said calmly. We're keeping him contained. Thor frowned. You could have asked me. I'm asking you now, Strange replied. Why are you here on Earth? Thor told him. Strange listened. Then, with a wave of his hand, he moved Thor through portals so fast it became dizzying. Library to Mountain Peak to Grand Hallway. I keep a watch list of beings from other realms, Strange said. Your father is one of them. He is in Norway. Thor arrived at a lonely cliff, facing the sea. The wind was cold, salt biting the air, and there, sitting peacefully on a rock, was Odin, older now. Weary, his power faded. Thor approached slowly. Father. Odin turned, his eyes full of pride and sorrow. My son. Thor knelt before him. I'm so sorry. We thought you dead. Odin nodded. I am dying, Thor. Not with violence, not by betrayal, but simply by time. Thor shook his head. We can save you. We can. Odin stopped him gently. My time has come. I have lingered longer than I should. Loki appeared then, Strange having released him. He looked at Odin without illusion. No anger, just grief. I tried to send you here, he admitted quietly, to live as you wished. Odin nodded. I know Loki. It was the first time he had ever spoken Loki's name without judgment. Loki lowered his gaze. Odin stood, looking out at the endless sea. I love you, my sons, he said simply. Thor's breath caught. Loki stood frozen. Odin looked to the sky. Remember this place. This could be home. Thor stepped forward. Father. Odin turned back to them, and now there was fear in his eyes. She's coming. She? Thor repeated. Odin spoke the word slowly, as if each one weighed centuries. My firstborn, your sister, Hela, goddess of death. Thor froze. Loki stared. Odin's voice dimmed. I once fought beside her. We conquered realms together. She grew powerful, too powerful. When she hungered for more than life itself, I imprisoned her, bound her, locked her away. But my life held her there, and now I go to my rest. The wind stopped, the sea stilled. Odin closed his eyes and became light. He dissolved into golden dust, carried away by the wind into the sky he had ruled for millennia. The Allfather was gone. The age of Odin was over. Thor reached out helplessly to the fading light. Father, he cried. But there was no answer, only silence. And then darkness cracked the sky. Chapter 9 Ragnarok. Thor fell through the void like a broken comet, swallowed by cosmic winds and spiraling energy as the shattered remains of the Bifrost flickered far behind him. His father was gone, his hammer was destroyed, and his home was no longer safe. Lightning still pulsed faintly inside him, but it felt distant now, like a heartbeat struggling to hold on. He reached out, not with his hands, but with his spirit, trying desperately to grasp something, purpose, direction, hope, but the void gave him no answer. Grief was now his only companion as the violent pull of the wormhole dragged him toward a world at the edge of time and space. He crashed through its atmosphere with brutal force, slamming into mountains of rusted metal and broken spacecraft. Pain erupted in his body, raw and jarring, reminding him of a cruel truth. Even gods can fall. He rose slowly, muscles aching as he forced himself to stand. Around him stretched a wasteland made not of sand or stone but of garbage. Wrecked starships, dead machines, burned metal, abandoned weapons from 1,000 lost battles. Above him swirled the sky, torn open by roaring wormholes that spat out debris from across the galaxy. This was a graveyard of civilizations. Thor had no name for it yet, but soon he would know it as Sakaar, a world where the lost are sold, the strong survive, and the rest are forgotten. Before he could regain his bearings, scavengers began to surround him. Crude scrap armor, cybernetic implants, jagged teeth, they resembled vultures drawn to a wounded beast. Thor lifted his fists, ready to fight, but his vision swayed. He had not yet recovered from the battle with Hela, and without Mjolnir he did not feel whole. The scavengers lunged, energy nets and stun cables wrapping around his body. He struck two of them down, lightning sparking from his fists, but more piled on. Something hissed behind him. A ship, then a voice, calm, dangerous. He's mine! A woman stepped through the smoke, confident in her stride, a flask of drink in her hand as though the world behind her burned for her amusement. She moved with the ease of someone who feared nothing. Her eyes locked onto Thor, first with annoyance, then with calculated interest. She pressed a button on her wrist gauntlet, and a golden disc shot through the air, slamming against Thor's neck. Pain exploded in his spine. Electricity tore through him. He collapsed to his knees, helpless as his own body betrayed him. She smirked. Welcome to Sakaar. He awoke to neon. Color bled across metal like spilled paint, and music pulsed through the bones of a city that should not have existed. Sakaar rose around him in stacked towers and welded junk, a glittering shrine to chaos, stitched together from the wreckage of 1,000 ages. He was strapped to a gurney, wrists bound, that golden disc still biting into the skin of his neck. The woman who had taken him, helmet now tossed aside, hair matted by rain and engine heat, walked beside the cart without looking at him, as if hauling gods were just another errand. In the glare of the city's lights, he saw her properly for the first time. There was pride in the way she carried herself, a soldier's economy in every step, and a sorrow so deep it had turned to iron. Scrapper 142, someone called her. She didn't correct them. She didn't correct anyone. She delivered the prize and got paid, then lifted the flask again like a shield against memory. Thor watched the tilt of the bottle and thought, that is not a scavenger. That is a warrior hiding from the past. They dragged him into a hall where decadence had learned how to laugh. Holograms waltzed, confetti cannons exhaled, and the walls trembled with the smug purr of a ruler, pleased by his reflection. At the end of the room, a throne spun lazily, and on it lounged a man in shimmering silk, fingers stained the color of blue sugar, smile wide enough to be a trap. The Grand Master. He admired Thor as if he were choosing a dessert. What do I always say? He asked the crowd around him. Life is a cycle. You're in it. I'm at the top. His gaze sharpened. You, my friend, will be wonderful for ratings. He snapped, and attendants fitted a fresh obedience disc to Thor's neck, the kind of quiet cruelty that turns strength into spectacle. Don't look so glum, the Grand Master whispered, leaning in. Around here we celebrate the inevitable. His eyes flicked to a giant screen where a name blazed in letters tall as a wall. Champion. The arena roared. You'll fight him tomorrow, the Grand Master said, delighted. People love a good mystery. They'll love it even more when the mystery kills you. The attendants hauled Thor away toward a pit where prisoners were stacked like spare parts, and the throne spun again, bored already. The ruler smiled a painted moon. Down in the holding pens, a rock-bodied giant with a gentle voice waved shyly. Hey man, I'm Kor. This is Miek. He's got knives for hands. You're gonna be fine. Thor blinked at the absurd kindness and felt, against his will, a small unclenching in his chest. Korg, explained Sakaar with the patience of a teacher. The wormholes in the sky, the garbage that fed the city, the obedience discs that kept the slaves. Sorry, slaves with jobs, he corrected. Docile. Only way out is the big one, he added, pointing up to a storm-torn wound in the heavens. They call it the Devil's Anus. Don't love the name, but it's the only door that doesn't swing back closed. Thor listened, eyes drifting to the cell's flickering window where distant towers danced in sickly blues and pinks. I need to get to Asgard, he said. My sister has taken it. Hela. Korg winced. Oof, goddess of death, big antlers. Yeah, hard to pass. But good news, we're starting a revolution. Need a pamphlet? He held out a crumpled flyer. Thor almost laughed. Keep it. I'll need both hands. Night on Sakaar looks like daytime in a fever dream. When they marched him into the arena, the crowd's roar felt like a weather system. The floor trembled, gates rose, fire belched from the walls. Thor paced the sand, eyes lifted to the iron sky, and breathed until the panic of powerlessness loosened its fingers from his lungs. He could not hear Odin any more, could not feel Mjolnir at his palm like a heartbeat waiting to answer, but lightning still lived in him. He closed his eyes and reached for it, not as a weapon but as a memory of who he was before the hammer taught him how to be a god. The far gate crashed open. The champion stepped into the light, green, massive, roaring, the husk. Relief tore through Thor so sharply it came out as laughter. Yes, he shouted to the Grandmaster's box. We know each other. He's a friend from work. The arena adored the line, but adoration does not change physics. Hulk charged. The first blow felt like a building falling on his rib cage. Thor flew, skidding across the sand, stars bursting behind his eyes. He crawled to his feet, hands up, voice soothing on instinct. The sun's getting real low. Hulk grabbed him and hurled him into a wall. Buddy, Thor coughed, I need you to. A fist erased the sentence. The fight became rhythm. Hit, fly, stagger, rise. Thor realized with a cold twist of panic that the obedience disc flared each time he gathered a spark, dragging him back to the sand with a scream of electricity. The Grandmaster giggled into a flute of something expensive. Tension, tension, he murmured, and the crowd devoured it. There comes a moment every story when the body remembers what the mind has forgotten. Thor lay on the arena floor, the world ringing like a bell, and saw Odin standing in a field of wind and gold, not as a king, not as a judge, but as a father. Are you Thor, the god of hammers? The memory asked, kind and amused. Lightning rolled in Thor's chest like a waking animal. He stood, not with bravado, but with surrender, and opened himself. The spark became a river. The river became a sea. It crashed through him, out of him, above him. He met Hulk's charge with a blast of lightning that carved the arena's air into white daylight. The crowd gasped. Thor pressed forward, hands alive with storm, pushing the giant back step by step until victory felt close enough to grasp, and then pain ripped him from inside. The obedience disc. The Grandmaster had pressed a button, face curdled by disappointment that his story's twist was not the one he wrote. Thor convulsed, fell, darkness snapping down like a trap. When he woke, he was in silk sheets he hadn't asked for, and the champion snored in a pool of bath water the size of a small lake. The gladiators' quarters were echo and heat, lined with trophies of victories no one survived to tell. Hulk lounged like a cat, content, childlike, and impossible. He had not been Banner for 2 years. Sakaar had given him what earth never could: applause without questions, life without fear. He painted his face, he practiced his roar, he liked the bed and the hot tub and the way the crowd loved him without asking him to be smaller. Thor tried words like ropes. "We're friends," he said, slow and warm, as if coaxing a wounded animal from a thicket. "I need your help." Hulk splashed him with green indifference. "Hulk, stay. Hulk strongest there is." Thor tried flattery, mockery, pleading. He tried the lullaby Natasha had used, "The sun's getting real low," and got a thrown shield for his trouble. He sank onto a couch carved from some extinct beast and stared at the window where Sakaar's sky flexed with new garbage tumbling from the holes. Somewhere beyond that bruised horizon, Hela was raising dead soldiers in Asgard's vault, and Heimdall was hiding the living in the mountains, and Loki was wherever self-preservation paid the most. Loki, it turned out, was upstairs. Thor found him greased into the Grandmaster's court like a silvered eel, smiling in the right places, nodding at jokes that devoured other men. They traded barbs like old coins. "I'm honored," Loki murmured. "You become a gladiator. I rise in society. We all have our talents." "Your talent," Thor said, "is survival." "Yours," Loki replied, "is stubbornness. It's less marketable." They needed each other as always, and hated the need as always. "We get off this planet together," Thor said, "or not at all." Loki's eyes flicked to the champion's sigil, carved into a pillar. "You'll never convince him to leave. He finally found a place where the world loves what he is." For once there was no cruelty in it, only pity. It was a Scrapper 142 who changed the equation. Thor followed her to the hangar where ships slept like dragons, and for a heartbeat she stood in the blue of a loading bay light, silhouette cut from iron, and he saw the shape of the person she used to be. "I know who you are," he said softly. "Valkyrie." The word struck like a bell. Her eyes flicked, then hardened. "You don't know anything." Later, in a dingy room that smelled of fuel and old rain, Loki brushed her mind with sorcery and her memory opened like a wound. She stood again in that ancient sky where Hela had slaughtered the Valkyries in a storm of black blades, her sisters falling around her like stars snuffed by night. One had thrown herself between Hela's spear and 142's heart, and the world had ripped, and the last Valkyrie had fallen. Not dead, but buried alive inside a bottle. When the vision ended, she punched Loki hard enough to drop him. "Try that again," she said, voice raw, "and I break your hands." But when she looked at Thor, shame and fury braided into something like purpose. "If your sister is on Asgard," she said, "then we are already late. Plans on Sakaar are like fireworks, bright, loud, and unreliable. Thor's was simple: steal a ship fast enough to outrun the Grandmaster's darts, free as many of Korg's co-workers as possible, grab the champion if he'd come, and aim the nose at the worst name in the sky. Everything after that was prayer. He went to Hulk first. "I can't do this without you," he admitted, words tasting like humility rather than defeat. Hulk scowled, defensive as a child with his favorite toy. "Hulk stay, Hulk have home." Thor nodded. "The acceptance of a friend rather than a general. Then I'll find my way alone." He stole the obedience disc controller from the champion's quarters with the help of a trinket and a lie, then crept to the edge of the arena floor where an old Quinjet lay like a fossil. The letters AV still clung to its flank. He tapped the panel. "Strongest Avenger." The ship chimed politely. "Point break." The ramp lowered. "Yes," Thor muttered, half aggrieved, half fond. He stepped inside and memory washed up. New York, Ultron, Sokovia, faces like constellations he could not quite hold. He touched the console, and an old recording bloomed, a woman's voice soft with worry. Bruce, Natasha said from another life, I need you. The champion lumbered in behind him, angry and curious, eyes narrowing at the ghost in the air. The voice gentle, the past reached across the room, and the giant cracked in the middle. Green shuddered, breath hitched, and then there was no Hulk at all. There was a man, shaking, naked, eyes drowning in the confusion and grief. Bruce Banner looked at Thor as if emerging from a nightmare into another nightmare. How long? He rasped. 2 years, Thor said gently. Bruce swallowed, horror whitening his face. 2 years he had the keys. Thor put a blanket around his shoulders as if that could knit together what had been torn. I need your help, he said, not as a god, not as a prince, but as a man asking another to stand. Bruce stared at the alien city lurching beyond the windshield and laughed without mirth. I can't turn into that again. If I do, I don't think I come back. Thor told him the truth without cruelty. If we don't stop my sister, there won't be a home to come back to. The words hung between them like a bridge no one wanted to cross. They crossed it together. Valkyrie arrived in armor she had not worn since the world ended the first time. Leather strapped tight, hair braided like a promise, knives singing at her hips. In the hangar, alarms bleated and guards poured in, and Thor turned to Loki with a look that was not a question. Get help, he said. Loki groaned. I hate get help. It works, Thor replied, then scooped his brother like a sack and staggered into the corridor shouting, Get help, my brother's dying. He hurled Loki into a phalanx of guards and the hallway collapsed into chaos. It was not elegant, it was effective. They sprinted through the garage, leapt into a gleaming leisure cruiser that looked fast enough to outrun shame, and blew a hole in the sky. The Grandmaster howled, paint running down his cheeks like melted mirth, and sent his death disc screaming after them. In the streets below, Korg discovered a microphone and a purpose. The revolution has begun, he cheered, as slaves with jobs ripped obedience discs from their necks and turned the city's tasers on their former owners. Mick clacked his knives joyfully. Somewhere, a balloon shaped like the Grandmaster's head drifted loose and bonked into a tower with a noise like a deflated ego. The chase through Sakaar's sky felt like riding the edge of a knife. Valkyrie flew as if the ship were a memory of her body, weaving through neon canyons and between scaffolds that groaned as darts clipped them. Bruce sat white-knuckled at the viewport, every muscle arguing with itself. Loki took the helm of sabotage and managed to betray them in record time, slipping off the ship to offer himself back to the winning side, until Korg and an uprising convinced him that the winning side had moved. Thor ripped out half the dashboard to find more speed, and laughter, real laughter, not the kind the Grandmaster sold, bubbled up despite the doom waiting at the end of the sky. This is what it felt like when lost things remembered their names. They broke the cloud line. Ahead, the devil's anus spun like a storm trying to swallow a star. Through there? Bruce squeaked. Oh, absolutely not. Absolutely yes, Thor said, eyes steady. There's no other way. The ship shuddered as gravity changed its mind. Static crawled across the windows. Lightning licked the hull. Thor stood in the center of the cabin, feet planted, shoulders squared, and for a heartbeat the storm outside reached for the storm inside. He did not call it, he did not command it, he allowed it. The ship tilted its nose toward home. In that long inhale before the plunge, Valkyrie glanced at him. Whatever she had been running from had finally stopped chasing. What's our team name again? She asked, deadpan covering relief. Thor almost smiled. The Revengers, he said. Bruce grimaced. That's terrible. It'll do, Thor answered, and leaned into the gravity that wanted them dead. They fell into the black. Metal screamed. The ship rattled like a prayer wheel spun by a giant. Lightning stitched cracks through space. and for a breathless instant the whole universe felt like it might fold. But the nose held, the hull held, their courage held. They punched through the eye of the storm and were spit into clean darkness on the other side, engines coughing, alarms clearing their throats into silence. Ahead lay the cold stars of the realm. Between and beyond that, home. Behind them, Sakaar burned with riot and fireworks, Korg delivering a victory speech into a microphone he did not know was off. As long as the foundations are strong, he assured his cheering crowd, a building collapsing politely behind him. We'll rebuild. The Grandmaster crawled out of a gold heap and declared the day a tie. In front of them, Asgard waited beneath a sky that did not know how to be merciful anymore. Hela had filled his throne room with the bones of history, raised an army from the dead, and opened the vault where old fires slept. Heimdall had gathered the living in the mountains and taught them the most sacred truth of their people, that Asgard is not a place, it is a promise. Thor stood in the cockpit, shoulders squared to the dark, and felt the shape of what had to be done settle into him like armor he had not wanted but finally accepted. He had lost his father, he had lost his hammer, he had lost the idea of himself that could only exist with both. But he had found something older, lightning that did not need metal to speak, friends who were not bound by blood but by choice, and a purpose that had nothing to do with a crown. The ship angled down, engines whining, the stars above them sliding as if pushed by a gentle hand. Valkyrie tightened her straps. Bruce closed his eyes and counted breaths like a man walking into a storm with a candle and enough faith to believe it would survive. Thor rested his palm against the bulkhead and felt it thrum. A mortal machine, but today a worthy steed. Home, he said, not to the others, not even to himself, but to the thing that had been calling him since the moment Odin became light. The word did not sound like a destination anymore. It sounded like a vow. They fell toward Asgard, and far below, in halls that once glowed with music and now rang with iron, Death waited on a throne that did not belong to her, smiling into a future she believed she already owned. The storm was coming home to end a world, so another could live. Thor felt the ship break through the cold veil of space and tip toward the light of home. And in that quiet before descent, he understood that he was not returning to save a place so much as a promise. Asgard had never been its streets or spires, it had always been its people. And those people were running out of time beneath the shadow of a sister who wore a crown of knives and called herself their queen. The cruiser bucked once, twice, then steadied under Valkyrie's hands. Bruce Banner sat pale and breathing through the fear he refused to name, and Thor stood in the doorway between cockpit and cabin as if his body were a bridge between who he had been and who he must become, eyes on the shrinking star that was home, jaw set not with anger now but with decision. And when Sakaar's neon finally vanished behind them, like a fevered dream, he said only one word, home. And the word did not sound like geography. It sounded like a vow. They dropped through cloud into a sky that had forgotten how to be merciful. And below the mountain backs he saw refugees moving like a river of color, a hidden caravan guided by a lone figure with a golden gaze, Heimdall, ushering what remained of Asgard toward the Bifrost while Hela's dead stalked the valleys. And even from this height Thor could feel the pulse of a fire igniting in the vaults where old secrets had slept too long. For Hela had cracked open the past and filled the throne room with the bones of history, draped in victory like a funeral robe. They sat down hard and fast on a rocky shelf above the city, the engines coughing into silence, and Valkyrie pulled her leathers tight like memory. Banner cinched the borrowed harness of a man who didn't want to fall into the monster again, and Thor stepped onto the stone, feeling, for the first time since Odin had become light, that the storm inside him and the storm outside were one and the same. They moved down through wind and ash toward the Bifrost, and the first sight that met them was the Fenris wolf, rising from the fjord like a nightmare given flesh, black fur slick with the sea, eyes as old as the first dark, its paws cracking the bridge as if it were only glass, and behind it came the dead, Hela's berserkers, crawling up from shadowed halls. And for a heartbeat Thor thought of their mother, and the way she would touch his cheek before battle as if smoothing a wrinkle from time, and then he ran. The fight began not with speeches but with breath and footfalls and the hum of a blade in Valkyrie's hand as she leapt cleanly into a knot of the dead, cutting a bright arc through bodies that refused to bleed. Banner hesitated on the rim, eyes on the wolf tearing toward the citizens Heimdall had gathered, and Thor shouted over the wind, "We need the big one!" And Bruce gave him a look that carried all the cost of the last 2 years, and said, "You know who I am," then stepped off the cliff. He fell like a prayer and hit the bridge with a human thud that made Thor's heart drop. But the Fenris wolf barreled past him, and the body in green flesh uncoiled with a roar that shook water from the sea. Hulk exploded skyward and met the monster's jaws with his own hands, the two titans tumbling into the fjord in a boil of foam and violence that made the bridge tremble. On the span itself the dead pressed in waves, and Heimdall fought with a blade that felt like part of the wind, shepherding mothers and old men and children past the last gate, while Scourge, poor Scourge with the executioner's axe and the coward's heart, stood behind Hela's ranks pretending the black paint on his face could turn him into something harder than he was. And in the palace the goddess of death waited because she understood something most conquerors do not, that true power does not chase, it draws the enemy near and breaks them when they arrive. Thor and Valkyrie carved a path across the bridge until the sky tore open above the city, and a shuttle, shaped like indulgence itself, came screaming down from the clouds with a riot of Sakaar slaves, now free at its guns. Korg at the loudspeaker declaring that the revolution had pamphlets and a great deal of enthusiasm, me clacking knives like cymbals, and at the center of it a figure in green, smiling with the old tired sadness of a liar who wants, just for a moment, to be useful, Loki, guiding the statesman's nose toward the river of citizens pouring onto the span. "Your savior has arrived," he announced with theatrical joy that landed like a confession, and for once Thor did not answer with barbs, only a nod that meant we are what we do today. The evacuation began in earnest, hull doors yawning open, citizens flooding up ramps like breath returning to a body, and on the far end of the bridge Hela appeared, black headdress bristling into a living crown, every step a negation of mercy. Thor met her halfway because he had no choice, because this was the road all his lives had bent toward, and when steel met shadow the air popped like thunder held too tightly. She moved with the economy of a truth that knows it cannot be bargained with. And when he cast lightning, she swallowed it. And when he swung axes made of light, she broke them with her hands. She spoke of the real history, of Odin and her in red centuries that had built the empire Thor had been born to inherit, of how he had painted over conquest with gold, and called it peace, and each syllable carried the sting of a story that had been buried in a garden. She cut him, first across arm, then across pride, and then across destiny, opening a line from brow to cheek that burned with ice, the world tilting and righting around the shock of suddenly seeing less and seeing more, and he fell not to stone but to memory. Odin's voice finding him on a green hill he had never visited with his feet, and always known with his heart. "Are you the god of hammers?" the old voice asked, amused even now, and Thor saw boys and storms and banishment and love and a desert where he learned humility, saw that the power had never lived in metal. It had simply been a door he no longer needed, and when he stood again in the ruin of the throne room, he was not healed so much as resolved. Hela laughed without humor and called him weaker for having understood anything at all. And somewhere below the vault, Loki slipped through shadow into the library of Asgard's sins, where the eternal flame burned with the appetite of old fires, where a crown the size of a man's chest waited beside it like a seed carved from doom. Thor's voice reached him down the halls as a thought more than a sound. Asgard is not a place, it's a people. He looked at the crown labeled with a name the palace had warded against, Surtur, and remembered a prophecy from a dungeon cell. Remembered a skull crowned in spires and a sword like a mountain. Remembered that some ends are also beginnings. And without ceremony, without flourish, without anything more than necessity, Loki fed the crown to the flame. In the throne room, the floor shivered as if the realm had inhaled. Hela paused, tilting her head toward the vault like an animal scenting weather. And then the horizon pulled itself upright, molten, colossal, a silhouette against all the sky. Surtur reborn in his true size, as tall as an ending sword rising from the sea with the patience of inevitability. Thor knew then that he had not returned to stop Ragnarok, but to call it by its name, to let the old world burn so the living could pass through the fire. And he told Valkyrie to hold the line, told Heimdall to move them faster, told himself that a king is not the one who saves the stones, but the one who saves the souls. Hela flew at Surtur with a shriek like iron tearing, spears growing from her hands like winter. But each strike that would have ended armies merely sparked against the giant's breastplate, and with one slow, sorrowful swing, Surtur's blade split towers that had stood since before memory, the shock wave traveling down the mountain into the city, through the halls, across the bridges, into the bones of everyone who had ever called this place home. On the span, Scourge watched the dead close on the last refugees and found finally the bottom of himself, threw away the pain and the pretense, leapt onto the open ramp with two stolen guns that chattered like defiance, and held the line the way cowards never do until the dead took him down and he fell smiling because he had decided who he was. Hulk threw Fenris from the waterfall, the wolf vanishing into the abyss with a sound like an old nightmare giving up, then looked up to see the fire giant breaking the horizon, and grinned the way only a creature who loves to punch can grin. But Thor shook his head. No, big guy, let him do it. And for once the strongest stopped, because a friend asked him to. In the vault, Loki's eyes flicked once, twice across the room where the Tesseract sat in its cradle like a blue heartbeat, and because he has always been himself, he palmed it, because stories about change are complicated, and because later that choice would call a different god to a different ship. And then he ran because the floor had become ocean, and the palace a ship without a hull. On the bridge, Valkyrie boarded the statesman last, hair wild, eyes bright with the old purpose she had thought forever dead. Heimdall gave Thor a look that carried both blessing and warning. Korg announced cheerfully that the foundations of Asgard were. Oh, never mind, there it goes. And the last of the people crossed the threshold as Surtur's blade rose for the final stroke. Thor stood in the open ramp a moment longer, one eye on the throne room where Hela howled and leapt, one eye, newly missing, on a future that required him to be more than worthy. And when Surtur's sword came down, and the realm that had named him cracked and folded and bloomed into firelight, he did not look away. The ship pulled back as the sea turned to magma, and the sky to smoke, and in the air above the grave of a planet, the people of Asgard watched their home become a star that went out. And there was weeping, and there was silence, and there was the kind of breath that hurts because it is the first one after a blow. And when the clouds finally swallowed the last glow, Thor turned to them. Valkyrie steady at his side, Heimdall solemn, Banner exhausted and afraid of himself, Korg optimistic about pamphlets, Mick clicking like applause, Loki hanging back with eyes that asked a question he could not form. And he spoke not as prince, but as what necessity had made him. Asgard is a people, We are alive. Where we go next is home. Somewhere in that quiet, a scrap of black cloth became an eye patch, and the old cape draped just so, not as costume but as admission, and a crown without metal settled on his shoulders, because leadership is heavier when it is only love. He asked the helmsman to set a course for Earth, the place of the blue planet and stubborn friends. And for a moment there was even laughter, because sometimes the only song the living can sing over a grave is a joke told softly. He and Loki stood together a few paces from the viewport and looked at the stars passing like slow rain, and Thor said, I believe in what you can be. And Loki did not answer because he had never known how to accept a gift without weighing its price. But he stayed, and sometimes staying is all the answer a brother can give. They turned toward the dark between, engines humming with a confidence the crew did not feel yet, and the statesman moved like a small, brave thought through a cold mind. Then the light ahead dimmed, a shadow pressed across the stars, and a ship the size of a horizon slid out of the black and took the view from the window, not hastily, not cruelly, simply with the inevitability of something that has been coming for a long time. The sanctuary. Two blotted the constellations, its hull a cathedral to conquest, and on a throne at its heart a figure waited with a patience that felt like gravity. The people of Asgard, newborn nation, just crowned king, stood in the light of their own reflections on an enemy's metal, and for the second time that night a chapter ended so another could begin. On the bridge no one spoke, because some storms you do not greet with words, and Thor, son of Odin and of all he had learned, squared his shoulders and let the silence say what kings say at the mouth of fate. We will meet this too. Chapter 10. The God Who Remains. The silence after Ragnarok did not last. In the cold black between stars, the statesman drifted like a candle after the storm, its hull scarred but whole, its people finally breathing without fear. Yet peace in the Marvel cosmos is a pause, not a promise. The shadow that swallowed the starlight ahead of them was not night, but the vast shape of the sanctuary too. Thor saw it before anyone else, a silhouette too large, too deliberate, blotting constellations with geometry. He had fought monsters and gods, but this was different. This was inevitability given metal form. When Thanos' ship locked onto theirs, the air itself seemed to tighten, and for the first time since his father's death, Thor felt the helplessness of scale. The explosion tore through the statesman's flank. Sirens howled, the deck split open, fire swallowed corridors that only hours earlier had been filled with quiet laughter and the first small hopes of a reborn people. The god of thunder woke among the wreckage, hands seared, the smell of ozone and blood thick in his lungs. Asgard's survivors screamed in the distance. He called for his brother. Loki stood before Thanos like a magician performing one final trick, his voice calm, his posture rehearsed. The Titan's children had already scattered the guards, and Heimdall lay dying near the bridge, his eyes still bright with defiance. Thor, bound in cables of energy, struggled as Thanos lifted him by the head, studying him the way a scientist studies an element. Loki spoke quickly, his tone smooth but his eyes darting with calculation. If you're looking for the Tesseract, he hesitated, and the faintest smile flickered across his lips. You should know I've kept it safe. He pulled it from his cloak, blue light spilling across his face. For an instant, Thor's heart twisted with both anger and admiration. Loki's life had always been a coin toss between self-interest and redemption. Thanos crushed the cube in his hand, and the space stone shimmered free like a heartbeat escaping a chest. Loki tried one more lie, calling himself the rightful king of Asgard, and then one more truth, whispering to Thor, I assure you, brother, the sun will shine on us again. Thanos' hand closed around his throat. The struggle was brief, almost gentle. When the body fell, it did not make a sound. For all his mischief, Loki's last act had been loyalty. Thor screamed against the restraints until his voice broke. But even gods have lungs. Heimdall, with his last strength, summoned the Bifrost one final time, hurling the Hulk across space toward Earth, a warning in the shape of a weapon. Then the sword dropped from his hand. The Titan looked down at the ruin he had made, spoke a word that sounded like prayer, and left them drifting among the ashes. Thor survived the explosion of the ship by chance or by will. When the Guardians of the Galaxy found him, floating half dead in open space, it was Rocket who dragged him aboard, and Peter Quill who made a joke too fast, and it was the sound of laughter that reminded Thor he was still alive. He told them about Thanos in words that trembled with exhaustion, about the stones, about the death of everything they loved. And though Quill tried to hide it, the room went quiet as faith being measured. They split their mission like dividing grief, half to nowhere, half to Nidavellir. Thor chose the forge. He needed a weapon that could kill a god. Nidavellir was cold in a way that went beyond temperature. The forge of the dwarves, once a sun that burned metal into miracles, hung dead in the void like a heart that had forgotten how to beat. Thor stepped onto the rings that circled its star and felt the echo of what it used to be, the place where his hammer had been born, where creation itself had been bent to his family's will. Now only silence answered him. The god who had spent his whole life fighting was at last asking for something only makers could give, a chance to rebuild. Eitri, the last of the dwarfs, emerged from the shadows with hands of blackened steel and eyes that had seen too much loss. His people were gone, their bodies frozen in place like statues around the dying forge. Thanos came, he said simply. He made me build the gauntlet. Then he killed them all. He looked at his hands as if they still remembered the weight of the stones. Thor, without judgment, placed his own over them, then helped me make something to stop him. The dwarf studied him, and in that look there was recognition, not of a king, but of another craftsman of pain. Together they turned towards the dead star. The plan was madness. The rings that powered the forge were frozen. To reignite them, someone had to hold open the iris that channeled the star's energy. Thor had known since childhood what such light could do to mortal flesh, and now he was about to find out what it could do to divine flesh. Rocket worked the controls, Groot stood silent, Eitri prepared the mold. It'll kill you, the dwarf warned. Thor's reply was calm. Only if I die. He stepped into the mechanism as if walking into the truth. When the iris opened, the light of the neutron star poured through him, a river of white fire tearing down to bone. The scream he gave was not of agony alone. It was the sound of centuries of failure burning away. When he fell, smoking, it was a small hand that saved him. Groot, wild and wordless, stretched his arm and formed a handle from his own body, binding it to the glowing axe head that Eitri had pulled from the mold. Stormbreaker was born, its edge humming with the same old thunder but shaped now by sacrifice rather than pride. The weapon leapt to Thor's hand like an oath renewed, and when he summoned the Bifrost again, the bridge obeyed. It opened not onto peace but into war. Wakanda was already breaking under the weight of Thanos' armies. The air was thick with smoke and energy blasts, and the horizon pulsed with the rhythm of 1,000 alien machines. The Avengers, those who had survived politics, distance, and doubt, fought shoulder to shoulder. Banner, trapped in a suit of armor that mocked his absence, punched through lines of creatures bred only for dying. Steve Rogers led, as he always did, quietly, from the front. The ground shook, and for a heartbeat they thought it was another wave of enemy craft. Then the sky split open. The Bifrost roared down in a column of light, and out of it strode the god of thunder, Stormbreaker in his grip, lightning crawling over his skin like language rediscovered. Beside him came Rocket, grinning with a gun twice his size, and Groot, silent and deadly. Thor's first swing tore through a leviathan in midair. His second cleared a field. Bring me Thanos, he roared. And for a few minutes, hope itself had a sound again. The mad titan came at dusk, the stones glowing in his gauntlet like planets enslaved. One by one the heroes fell. Vision was torn apart, the Mind Stone ripped from his head like a candle from wax. Thor arrived in the last moment, Stormbreaker spinning through the smoke, finding its mark sinking deep into the Titan's chest. Lightning danced through the sky, the earth cracked, and Thor stood over his enemy with vengeance and justice indistinguishable in his eyes. I told you, he whispered, pushing the axe deeper. You'd die for that. Thanos looked up at him, calm even in defeat. You should have gone for the head. He snapped his fingers. The sound was small. The consequence was infinite. Silence followed the snap, a silence so deep it seemed to erase sound itself. The battlefield exhaled, and then the world began to dissolve. One by one, the warriors turned to ash. Friends, allies, strangers, each flake of dust carrying a story that would never be told. Thor stared as the axe fell from his hand, as Thanos vanished through a doorway of light, as the universe itself seemed to exhale and collapse into quiet. He had fought for so long and lost again. When he found the Titan later, far across space on a world of green and sunrise, it was not as a conqueror but as a broken man. The gauntlet was fused to Thanos' arm. The stones gone, the work finished. Thor said nothing. He simply raised Stormbreaker and did what he should have done before. The blow was clean, the head fell, and when it was over there was no triumph, only a vacuum where purpose had been. The years that followed were measured not in battles but in absence. New Asgard grew on a strip of Norwegian coast, a town of weathered roofs and stubborn hearts. The sea was grey, the people quieter than before. Thor, once the axis around which worlds spun, lived among them not as a god, but as a man who could not look backward without breaking. He hunted, he drank, he hid. The spark of lightning in him dimmed until even storms seemed to pass. The village out of respect, when the Avengers came for him, 5 years after the world had ended, they found not the Prince of Thunder but a ghost in a sweatshirt, half hidden behind laughter that didn't reach his eyes. "We found a way," they told him. "We can fix it." He almost said no. Then he thought of his mother, his father, his brother, of all the sons that had gone dark, and the old rhythm of duty stirred once more. The time heist, they called it, but for Thor it was pilgrimage. In the quiet halls of Asgard's past he found her again, Frigga, her presence calm and unbothered by the years between. She saw him instantly, the way only mothers do, and he wept like a child. "The future hasn't been kind to you," she said gently. "I didn't come to change it," he managed. "I came to say goodbye." She smiled, the same soft curve that had steadied him as a boy. Everyone fails at who they're supposed to be. The measure is how well they succeed at being who they are. She pressed Mjolnir's past self into his hand and said, "You're still worthy." The hammer rose, as it always had, but this time its weight was kindness, not proof. Back in the present, the sky tore open one last time. Thanos came again, from a different thread of time, bringing the same ambition. The final battle stretched across a field of ruin, gods and mortals and machines against a philosophy that had forgotten mercy. Thor fought beside Captain America, who lifted Mjolnir in his own hand, a sight that made the god laugh even through blood and exhaustion. Together they stood against the tide, and when Tony Stark made his final choice, the lightning dimmed and stayed dim. The snap echoed once more, and the dust returned to flesh, and the cost was written into every survivor's silence. After the funeral, Thor walked the shoreline alone until the wind turned colder. He found Valkyrie among the ships, already speaking like a leader should, and he saw in her what Asgard would need: strength without crown, humor without cruelty. "It's your time," he said, and when she protested, he smiled. "I'm not a king, never was. Asgard has hers now." He looked to the sky where the stars were beginning to show, and for the first time in what felt like lifetimes, he didn't flinch at what he saw reflected there. The Guardians took him in without ceremony. Quill argued about the captaincy, Rocket muttered about space, beer, and Groot said something like acceptance. The ship jumped into the dark, carrying the last son of Odin towards something he did not yet have a name for. What followed was not legend, but life, a string of small, absurd, necessary adventures. And in the war that came after, when gods fell and love itself was tested, Thor met the child born of eternity's edge. She looked at him with eyes that held stars and innocence both, and in that gaze he found what he had lost across all his journeys, a reason, not to fight, but to stay. He called her love, because that was what remained when all the thunder was done. The axe hung quiet at his side, the sky above him clear, and the man who had once believed himself the end of storms learned instead to be their calm. The god who had outlived kings and monsters now lived for mornings, for laughter, for the simple truth that being worthy had never been about strength. It had always been about heart. Thor Odinson, breaker of storms, survivor of worlds, son of Asgard, sailed again into the stars, not as a warrior seeking glory, nor a god seeking worship, but as a father walking beside his child, and somewhere far behind them, in the ruins of all that had been, the echo of thunder rolled once more, softer this time, like a promise kept.